kick us off. And so today's topic is winning the hearts of Gen Z volunteers. For those of you that don't know our speaker, her name is Kapeen, and she's the vice president of a company called the Lukens Company. So with that, I'll actually turn it over to Kapeen to introduce herself and kick us off.
All right. Let me just make sure I got up and running. So it's 2025, still not sure if my screen is being shared or not, but we'll go from there. So everybody, thanks for joining me. My name is Kapeen Alexander, and I'm the Vice President of Nonprofit at the Lukens Company. For nearly 40 years, our agency has provided full service fundraising and marketing capabilities to a very diverse range of nonprofit organizations. Our clients span from human services, advocacy, arts, culture, faith-based museums, rescue missions, and really so much more. But we're here to talk about generations. And like I mentioned, I am from Gen X. So born in 1976, I'm in the heart of it. And for those of you who aren't Gen Xers, or not part of what I would say is the very best generation, I would say that in a nutshell, how we describe ourselves is that we're fluent in sarcasm, much like what I just said, fluent in sarcasm. It's kind of our second language, our love language. And some other things about our generation is we can artfully create a mixtape for any occasion. Are you going on a road trip? I can make you a mixtape for that. A picnic, no problem. Are you going through a breakup? I can make a mixtape for that, but I need to know if you initiated the breakup or the other person initiated the breakup, because there's a very different mixtape for both of those. And should the tape come out of the mixtape, we can skillfully repair it with a #2 pencil. We also survived summers on scorching hot metal slides. We drank out of hoses from garden hoses that weren't necessarily our own, just neighborhood hoses. And we kind of had a curfew. It wasn't necessarily a curfew. Our parents often didn't know where we were, but if you did have to come in, it was whenever the street lights came on. So that's a little bit about Gen X. And why do we even care? Why does it really matter what generation a person is from? And I would argue that the best way for us to prepare for future marketing and volunteer trends is to really study the behavior of the demographic that's soon going to become your next gen supporter. So that's our Millennials and Gen Z. As of 2024, the largest generational cohort in the United States was millennials. They're the largest segment of the US workforce and hold significant influence in our economy and in our culture. The oldest millennials, as Gung had mentioned, the oldest millennials are actually in their early 40s now. And one thing that I think is amazing is they're getting to a certain point in life where they're kind of reevaluating what their motivations are and what their goals are. And we learned that 61% of them reported that last year in 2023, sorry, that's weird to say. So last year in 2020, 2 years ago, 2023, 61% of them said that they gave to charitable organizations, which is really in line with boomers who have always historically been the most philanthropic, who 64% said that they gave to charitable organizations. They might not necessarily be giving as much, but they are participating in charitable giving. So one thing is that because they're younger, when we start engaging them right now, we're really help shaping the future of their personal philanthropy, the philanthropy of their peers, the people that they engage with, as well as deepening the connection that they have to your organization and to your mission, which is incredibly important when we think about how this generation more so than any other is really seeking meaningful connections. So when we talk about our generation, what shapes a generation? What shapes a generation is those shared experiences during, I guess, a coming of age lifetime. What was happening in the economy? Were there any national or global events that were happening? And how did people engage around technology and work and communication? So when I look at these images, when they go from left to right, these are some images that shape the values and the beliefs and the identities of baby boomers and Gen X. So from the oldest to the youngest, the oldest boomer to the youngest Gen Xer, that's actually 34 years. That's 34 years of technology and innovation. There was new ways to communicate. There were so many life events that inherently changed our nation, like the moon landing in Woodstock. Although I wasn't alive for any of those, it certainly influenced my parents who I heard all the stories about these things. Things, the rise of the personal computer and obviously the internet. I can still very distinctly hear the voice of "You've got mail," even though during AOL, I think it was probably my early 20s when AOL came on. I remember struggling with dial-up internet and not understanding why I couldn't be on my internet and the phone at the same time, and so much happened during those periods. So I think to myself, when we sometimes struggle as millennial as Gen X and boomers in this space, we're always think like, well, the younger generations, they just don't understand. They're weird, they're different, they don't perform the same. And I think that a lot of times that we have to give them some grace. We have to give them grace because if you think about how differently they grew up versus how we grew up, um, we shouldn't expect them to be the same, and we shouldn't expect that their performance or how they act or how they show up is the same as what we've experienced in the past. But just as we give them grace, I think that we need to do that a little bit for ourselves and say it's okay that we don't know, but we're going to figure it out. What we're not going to do is stick our head in the sand and just hope that it all comes around. We're going to actively be part of figuring out how do we engage these people in a way that is really meaningful to them. So let's just take a second to get to know them a little bit. Millennials and Gen Z, I think very unfairly, sometimes they're labeled as being superficial or shallow. And I think that's a lot of times because they're connected on their phones and not necessarily in face to face. And we think that they're not paying attention. We think that they're not listening, but it's not the case at all. It's actually a generational cohort that really seeks genuine authenticity. Authenticity from their peers, from their leaders, and from the organizations that they support, whether that is a for-profit business or a nonprofit organizations. Our millennials were born in 1981 to 1996, and they were the first people who grew up with internet, smartphones, and social media. It might have been very early iterations of those things that many could probably remember a flip phone and dial-up internet, but even though they were early iterations, for a large part of them, it was a very normal part of everyday life to be connected in some capacity. This group really craves flexibility and purpose in the work that they do, and they thrive in team environments. So those are some of the things that we want to remember when we're trying to engage them as volunteers, saying, well, this group wants flexibility. So how can I shape my program around some flexibility? How could I create more purpose in the work that they do? Can you suit everybody's needs? Of course not. It's just some things that we want to be thinking about when we're building our volunteer programs. When it comes to their communication, they prefer texting, social media, and email. And at that, an informal email. My brother, who is older than me, I was writing an email and he said, does that say, I hope this message finds you doing well? And I said, yeah. And he goes, are you on a covered wagon on the Oregon Trail? Who says that? You sound like your family has been, going through it. And he was really just saying I sounded really old instead of like, hey girl, what's going on? Hope you had a good weekend. So they like very informal emails. And after that is Gen Z, 1997 to 2012. I am in particular very kind of obsessed with Gen Z. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she is definitely every single bit of Gen Z. So it's very interesting for me to see her navigate the world and how she experiences things, how she relates and reacts to things, and what inspires her, motivates her, and makes her angry. I just love kind of sitting and watching all of that. These digital natives, they are true digital natives. They are the very first generation that they don't even know a world without smartphones. They don't know a world of taking a photo and then having to take it to the store to drop off your film to get it developed, for only to realize that 2 weeks later that there's not a single good photo in the world. They just don't know that kind of reality because they've always been connected. Social media, digital content, and influencers, that's really shaped their lives from from a really early age. I think that one thing that's so interesting about them is that they're creators and they're entrepreneurs. They want to have some control over what's going on in their lives, and they want to have control over, I'd say they want to have control over their experiences and how those experiences relate to their personal values. They deeply value diversity and inclusion, and they're fluent in the language of social media, texting, emojis, and GIFs. I never know if it's GIFs or GIFs, so I'm going to go with I don't know. Gonna intertangle them. I think one thing is here is the diversity and inclusion part is really big. So when you do look at the photos, sometimes we put up photos that we really liked, or um, we really liked, or somebody, there's one person in particular, they always take good photos and it's of the same group of people. And especially when you're photographing your volunteers, you might have some core volunteers, but you always want to remember is when people are looking at that, if you say, hey, let's, thanks to our volunteers, thanks to our volunteers. But when I see that picture of your volunteer and I think, well, that doesn't look like me. Those don't look like people that I would associate with, not associate with, but that I would be spending time with, or that I would have a meaningful connection with. So if you do have a diverse base of volunteers, you want to make sure that you're featuring them and highlighting them, because it's really important to Gen Z. So they're the future of philanthropy. This is it right here. It's important that we take the time to understand their approach to technology, expectations for meaningful experiences, and the way that they communicate. This is kind of one of my favorite parts about them is how engaged they are around philanthropy. At the Lukens Company, we recently conducted a large-scale research project because we wanted to better understand donor and volunteer motivations by generation. When we asked, why do you volunteer? 61% of millennials and Gen Z said, because I want to set an example for others. In comparison to that, only 36% of boomers selected that they wanted to set an example for others. So the advantage that that has for a nonprofit is that younger generations, their desire to set an example, it creates this ripple effect. So nonprofits have this unique opportunity where you can tap into the natural inclination of this generation to inspire others, inspire their family and friends and peers. They want to inspire those people to actually get involved and rally around your mission. And a couple ways that we can do that, I think to start is these days technology is really shaping how Gen Z and millennials think about how they think about volunteering. They find opportunities through social media where they spend a significant amount of their time, and they're tracking their impact with apps. And we want to make sure that we're making this process as seamless as possible. In that same research study that we did, we learned that 73% of Gen Z and millennials, they said that they value the ease of involvement, that they didn't want it to be a convoluted, bogged down process. It was important to them that it was very easy. So for nonprofits, this is a really big opportunity. When you embrace tech like these online signups, digital scheduling tools, platforms that show the difference volunteers are making. I love this kind of graphic here from Civic Champs that shows 403 hours. If you look at that, and at the top of the graphic, it had some kids, which I imagine is for a youth-centered organization. But I see how many hours I've contributed. I see the kind of people that I'm helping who's benefiting from that. So when you can connect these younger audiences to the work that they're doing, it's very important in keeping them engaged for the long term. And Gung, this is, you're leading this app. So if you want to kind of showcase any of the options they have in here, I love selecting your event. This is really epitomizes how do you make this easy for them to get involved.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And then going here, younger generations, recognition. So recognition is important. Recognition is important for all of us. Younger generations aren't just volunteering for the recognition. So we shouldn't feel like that they just want to do it for the gram, or they just want to do it to post on social media. They value it, but it's very big to, it's important to them that their contributions are acknowledged. And that could be pretty simple if you remember in the beginning that they want to set an example for other people. So if you can shout them out on social media, here's maybe this year we're going to spotlight 20 volunteers under 20. And it's just a little story. It has a photo of them and it thanks them. 30 under 30, however you want to do it, but making sure that you're acknowledging them, as simple as a social media shout out, maybe a certificate that they can take a picture of and they can post themselves, a frame on their LinkedIn, even a chance to take on a leadership role within the organization. It doesn't have to be a massive leadership role. You're not going to say, if you're an organization that does a 5K, you're probably not going to say, could you lead our next 5K? But you can say, hey, do you think that you can take care of volunteer check-in? Do you think that you can help us? You can lead the effort in getting all the bags stuffed so that they have an expanded role within the opportunity. So for nonprofits, publicly celebrating your volunteers or offering expanded opportunities is really going to make that loyalty and encourage long-term involvement. It's going to make it stickier. Younger generations are also, interestingly enough, they're new in their careers, so they're looking for ways to grow their professional skills while also giving back. So when we talked earlier, we mentioned that millennials, one thing that was very unique to their generational cohort is that they wanted to find meaning in their work. So imagine if you can find this opportunity to build your professional skills and to advance your career, but also blend that with the work of nonprofit and giving back to your community or to a mission that you're passionate about. So a marketing student, they might very well jump in and maybe revamp a nonprofit's social media presence. It doesn't mean that they're taking over the social media. It can mean that they're streamlining your user handles, that they're making sure that your mission is lined up across all of them, that your branding is pulled together. An accounting major might come alongside the CFO and the finance team when they're getting their annual report ready. So there's all of these opportunities that you can sit back and think, how could I make this experience meaningful for this particular audience? So if you can create skill-based volunteer roles, it's a great way to engage this group. They're really eager to combine their passion and their opportunities for professional development. The 77% see volunteering as a way to explore careers was from Do Something Strategic when they reached out to Gen Z to see why they were volunteering. So I thought it was interesting how many of them were doing it because they wanted to actually explore their career path. I thought that this was really interesting, a little bit of a pop quiz, and maybe if Ariana or Gung, maybe if you guys can kind of just pull out what you see in the chat. Gen Z, when it comes to face-to-face interaction, face-to-face connection with their peers, how much less time do you think Gen Z gets
Hmm.
than previous generations? So in hours. So how many less hours a year is Gen Z experiencing than their previous generations?
We'll give folks a moment to type their guesses here in chat.
Uh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna I don't want to cheat because I'm seeing the answers come through on the chat. But if I had a guess, I would say yeah. My guess would be maybe let's say ooh I'm gonna say 500. All
Okay.
right, so let's see what else we have. We got a full range here. 250, Rachel, Marissa said 360, 100, 300, 720, 1,000, 50, another 1,000 by Aaron, 550, Ellen and or Mary Ellen and I are very similar. Jill said 200, Sadie said 200, and Paul said 1,500, and then 225, 50%. Kind of an orthogonal answer there.
Yeah.
1,000. And then yeah, recent ones between 250 to 400. So yeah.
So it is 1,000 less
Whew.
hours. It was a recent advisory by the
You like
U.S. Surgeon
cabbage?
General. Yeah. So the U.S. Surgeon General had an advisory and it was 1,000 less hours than they're getting than their previous generation. So it's nearly 41 days. And some of that makes sense because you do know that they're connected online and for many of them to be connected online because they don't know very much different, it's somewhat like being connected in person. Just a small story. My daughter, when it's cold in Dallas last year, she was taking the bus to school, And when it was cold, I would take her to the bus. And about 6 houses down was this other family, and they would drive to the bus, and we'd pull up right behind them, and we'd drop off our like 15, 16-year-old girls at the bus, and they'd get on. So finally I said, "What is that? What is her name?" And my daughter's like, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, you should ask her." And she's like, "Okay, I'll find her on Instagram." And I was like, "What?" What? I don't understand this. She lives 6 houses down. You guys are on the bus. You're on the bus 30 minutes to school, 30 minutes back, 5 days a week. Just go up to her and ask her, what her name is. She's our neighbor. And my daughter looked at me and she goes, "I am not going to be some weirdo who goes up on the bus and just starts talking to somebody. This isn't a city bus. This is the school bus with everybody who goes to the same school." But she really thought if she did that, she would definitely be a weirdo and be labeled. And she's like, "Everybody has their AirPods in, nobody's talking." And somehow she found her. I don't know how she did that online. It feels a little stalkerish, but they definitely engage and communicate different than we are. But it's 1,000 less hours to really build these deep in-person connections. And this is a group of people who want deep and meaningful connections. They want authentic interactions with other people. So what are some ways we can do this? And this is certainly kind of a more advanced opportunity, but when you have youth advisory boards, I just think this is a really amazing thing, and I highly recommend it because like we said, Gen Z wants a seat at the table. They're entrepreneurs, they're creators. They want to have some control over their destiny and their experiences. They want to co-create the solutions that their generation is going to benefit from. So if you're an organization like Plan International, and you are, and or Love is Respect is another one, where you actually have solutions that are supposed to benefit people in these younger generations, they want to say, well, then you need to talk to us. We need to be part of those solutions. You can't be a group of people in your 40s and 50s and 60s sitting around creating solutions for us without hearing from us. And I love that piece of it. I think it's really empowering. These boards typically span from members who are 15 to 23-year-olds old. They have a variety of responsibilities. And here's just some references that you may want to go on and take a look and see what they're doing. I know with Plan International, my daughter did that. She took a trip to DC. That was a trip that we paid for, and I'm pretty sure we covered the costs of it. And then after that, there was an advocacy program that they had to do that they had done online. But the nice part about it was all of these girls met in person, and they stayed for 4 days with each other, created a bond, and then came back and worked on a civic project together. Like I said, these are really advanced. A lot of organizations, you're managing the volunteers, you're managing the donor, you're also doing the annual report that I talked about in the beginning, that you don't necessarily have, you're wearing so many hats that you can't do this. So just some of the key takeaways that we can have from here is, think to yourself when you're looking at your volunteers is, how can I acknowledge them? What are we doing to acknowledge this group? What are we doing that's not the same thing that we've always done for everybody else? Um, how can I create really meaningful opportunities that are going to align with their ambitions for career development, social connection, and being close to the philanthropic mission that they're supporting? It goes back to food banks a lot for me, is when I think about food banks, and it's a really easy volunteer opportunity that you can go and you can pack food boxes. But how could food banks maybe create some sort of program that really caters to a younger generation? So if you say, we're going to do, today is our teen, the second Saturday of every single month, it's going to be for high school juniors and seniors. Come in and get your community service hours, and come in and connect to people in your community, like-minded young people in your community that are likely also, applying to colleges and thinking through that same process as you. If it's maybe for an older group, you might want to, when I say an older group, I was talking about older millennials. Sorry, Gung. I was talking about older group as in 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds. If you're talking about 30-year-olds, they're probably in a very different place in their careers. So you might want to think about volunteer opportunities that say, we want a rising leaders program. We want to develop a rising leaders program. And we're looking for up and coming people who are graduating from a master's program, who can help us develop our strategic plan or can help us develop our board. We want your feedback. How do we get more 30 and 40-year-olds involved in being part of our board? So those are some things that you can maybe say, this will help your career, it will help your social connection, and also bring you closer to the mission. And then going back to how do we make this volunteering process easier? And how do we make it more tech centered than we have in the past? Because that is something that we really need to. How do we move out of a spreadsheet? We're going to say a spreadsheet is not tech centered, but how could we move beyond that so the people who are managing this have a better experience on that end? Because when it's easier for you to manage, then it's a better experience for your donors. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know a lot about this dashboard, but Ariana had shared with me the deck from Civic Champs, and I saw this and I thought to myself, gosh, if I were in volunteer management, I want this dashboard. I think this is great. I don't know how it functions. It looks really easy to use. And so I thought this is pretty cool. Gung, I don't know if you want to add some context to what we're looking at here.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I missed yeah, earlier, right, the mobile app, right? So we have lots of ways to track check-ins, sign-ups, things like that, mobile included. And then so of course when you're collecting all that data, you want it to be easy for people to understand, the information. So, we have dashboards like this where at the top it has your big metrics. And then on the screen, what you're looking at is each row is kind of a active service, right? So, Hannah was a mentor, checked in at a certain time, did X amount of activities. And then the mouse over, what you're seeing is we, like many apps, collect feedback from folks, right? Reflections and feedback to say, hey, did you have a good time or not? And so you can see if there's someone maybe you need to reach back out to that has a frowny face, right? Versus someone that maybe was just super happy. And to Capeen's point on recruiting folks for leadership positions, right? Those might be the folks that you might target to say, hey, I saw you came in and had a really good experience. Would you like to, join our leadership team, or would you like to come back at a minimum and bring some friends? And so, yeah, so you're absolutely right. And in many ways, I think for us, we think about it, not necessarily from a tech or even generational standpoint, right? But just thinking about bringing the consumer experience to the nonprofit sector, right? So if you think about how easy it is to book a ride with Uber or how easy it is to get food from DoorDash, right? Could we make it just as easy, right, and intuitive in the same way that, I was joking earlier, my kids are pawing at the TV because they expect it to be touchscreen enabled. But, could you have something where it's so easy, anyone can use it, right, at any age or generation? So.
Excellent. And I think at this point, I think this is for you guys, is you have a demo coming up, or you can sign anybody up for the demo if they'd like to get to know more about it.
Hello,
Yeah,
oh my God, it's Ben.
oh, go ahead.
I think it might be somebody in the
On
background.
the way home, could we stop at the gas station?
Yep. They can
Yes, you
definitely
can.
stop at the gas station. But for yeah, we have a New Year's special for folks. If you wanna, you can click here to book a demo. We'll put that link in chat. Yeah, we have a sort of 10% off for this month for anyone that signs up. And so we'll also be doing just kind of a quick demo after the presentation for anyone that wants to stay on as well.
Perfect. And with that, I mean, if we want to move into a Q&A, here's all of our contact info. I am going to tell you, I am a painful extrovert. So if anybody wants to connect on LinkedIn, or you want to talk anything volunteer, direct response, fundraising, I am a nerd. I am here for all of that, and I love it. So
Yeah, and if you have questions about the presentation, put that in chat. I know sometimes it takes a moment to type. So one thing I've been curious about is, as you get um, younger volunteers, let's say you're successful and you're able to get a few folks in, how do you think about retention and keeping those younger volunteers happy, or how do you, cater that experience so that they want to come back? Any thoughts there, Kapil?
yeah, so I think that goes back to, is I love the term making it sticky for them. And one of the things we kind of chatted about in the beginning, is the volunteers, the nonprofit space has so much to learn from the for-profit space. So how could you make people kind of want to earn more or want to be deeper connected? And I was just saying this silly thing that a long time ago with TripAdvisor, I gave a review on TripAdvisor, and then shortly thereafter they sent me an email, and it was like, you are an emerging reviewer. People are really appreciating your review, so please give another one. And they gave me a badge. And I thought, and keep in mind, at this point I'm like 40 years old, I was like, people need to hear from me. Like I need to give this back to the world. So it was this silly little badge in an email. So I do think that that's a piece of it, is that over communicating and making people feel really good about the work that they did, and that there's a need for you to come back again. So if it is something like you work at the SPCA, or you volunteered at the SPCA, and you were helping clean kennels, maybe not a glorious job, but if it's like, hey, just to let you know, we were able to adopt 24 dogs last weekend, and they have homes, and here's a picture of that dog. And because of that, you are a canine hero, whatever the case may be. Right. And we really appreciate you. And here's a link, or to come back and sign up for we're looking for 20 volunteers to sign up this month, whatever the case may be. And I think that's a big thing, or even honoring anything around it. Is we had 100 volunteers, but you were the only one who did this particular thing, because people don't know what you're telling everybody else, right? And so if you can make your communication really feel like special, and we do this with our donors, if you can make them feel really special, like whether you gave $20 or $2,000, that $20 made a difference in
Mm.
in whether it was an animal's life, a person's life, or in the environment. That $20 made a really, really big difference. So your 2 hours made a really, really big difference, and here's why.
Yeah, and I saw just Todd in the comments made a interesting point that your stat around 71% of younger volunteers want to do it because to serve as an example for others, right? You can even celebrate that to say, you've inspired other folks, right?
Yeah, that's excellent.
So, let's see, make it social too. Um, our
I agree.
and our AI
I
note takers are commenting that they plan everything.
I like make it social too. And one of the things I like about that, especially, is if we have people who we know that are doing it for professional and career development, and LinkedIn has become such a popular social space. So not just thinking about it and honoring them on Instagram, but maybe in LinkedIn that you have a volunteer spotlight, and that spotlight is of people who are emerging in their career, or they're young entrepreneurs, where you can highlight them, so they have something to put on their personal LinkedIn page. I see a lot of people who are trying to develop their LinkedIn kind of identity and brand around themselves. And so anything that you can do for them to help them out, I think would go a long way in making them really not just close to your mission, but close to you as an organization, because you're giving back to them in a very different way that's meaningful to them.
Yeah. And there's one question came through from Marissa Green on thoughts on how to engage these generations when most opportunities are weekday during business hours and no remote opportunities. We have a few flexible opportunities, but sometimes it's hard to retain these volunteers.
That's a great question, and something that's always going to be one of those things that's difficult to get around, is how do you do this when all of everything is happening during the week, when people are in school and when they're working? And I think that comes to really thinking outside of the box. And I hate just gravitating back to the digital space, because there's many other things to do beyond that. But one thing that comes to mind for me is can you help us make content? So let's say it is an animal care organization. We need content. We're looking for content. Submit your content here. If it's an animal care organization, could you send us a cute video of your rescue dog, and why you're happy you have a rescue dog? Could we repurpose that? I always thought one thing that would be really cool for a food bank is if somebody said, here's our food box, this is the food box that we gave out today, and here's what you can make with the ingredients in the food box, right? On a hot plate. I think that if you kind of think out of the box and say, what are things that they can maybe do on their own time? There might be something where you say, you know what, we just wrapped up a really big event and we want to personally thank um, everybody who donated it to it. So we had a gala and we have 500 attendees that we want to thank. Could you call these 20 people, whether you get through or not? Could you give them a call on a Saturday between these hours? And here's a script, and we want you to thank these donors or even these volunteers. You can have volunteers thanking volunteers, handwritten messages to them, delivering things on the weekends to them. If you have, hey, we have a major donor, could you go and drop this off to them and say, hey, I'm a volunteer, we really appreciate you and just wanted to make sure you have this. So there are things, it's just a little bit of thinking outside the box and maybe not your traditional volunteer opportunities.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And then one more question came in from Jordan, and just asking, what social media platform do you think is best to reach this demographic of volunteers? Is there one that's more successful than others?
Facebook, the meta platforms always perform well. Facebook and Instagram also always perform well as it relates to getting the information out to them to let them know that there's volunteer opportunities. You certainly don't want to turn your social media platforms into message boards. So you want to do it away, and maybe you're featuring it in your stories as opposed to your core posts. But I think that that's a really great place to start, and not necessarily having to put ad spend or anything behind it, but doing it organically, because somebody who's looking for a volunteer opportunity probably has a sense of the type of organizations that they want to volunteer for. I think if you're looking at something that's more advanced, like a young leaders society, or as I was mentioning, there are young leaders boards, that's something that you maybe want to put on LinkedIn, so you're getting the right people who are already expressing interest on progressing and advancing in their careers and looking for opportunities to do that.
Awesome.
I love this. It says Gen Z will text people but hate talking to people on the phone, which is totally true. And so what I always tell my daughter about that is I'll be like, I'll pay to get your hair done, but you have to call and make the appointment. You have to call and make the appointment. And that's, or we can go out, we can go out to lunch, but you have to go up to the host stand and get us on the list. And she's also like, okay.
That's right. Yeah, instead of you could just also text it, right?
Yeah. I
Um,
do always tell her, though, I say, if she does really well in face-to-face interactions with adults, not necessarily her peers. And I would say if you can keep that up and you're a person who's really comfortable communicating face-to-face, I really think that will be something that differentiates you from your peers as you get older. So
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Some things are just easier to communicate when you have that sort of high fidelity of audio, if you will.
yeah.
So,
I wish I was able to kind of scroll through all these comments, because there's some pretty good ones in here about just people talking about their Gen Z children. I'm here, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. Gen Alpha is what we're calling the honey badger generation, because they don't care about anything. They are wildly fierce. And so lots of great comments in here.
and it'll be a big one too. It's the millennial kids, right? So that's a big push.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and I think, we got one more that came through. Victoria, what do you advise in more mature volunteer groups where your millennials and Gen Z share they feel like they're on an island with programs that they host solo, which are successful to attracting their age group?
So this would be events that it's peer-to-peer fundraising that they're doing on their own. Is that the type of event that we're talking about, I think? Is that how you took it, Gung?
Maybe if it's like a joint event is how I understood it. Like if you have a mix of different generations and they feel like they're a little bit on an island, perhaps. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So in those type of ways, I think it's really important for us as people on the nonprofit side to make sure that we're making every effort to make the groups more inclusive. And sometimes that's, if I went to a blanket making event, making blankets, and you can definitely see by each table where people were making blankets that it was groups of people who knew each other. So if you came into it and you didn't know each other, anybody, or you knew very few people, you would feel a little uncomfortable. You'd feel like you're on your own island. So one of the things that this particular, it was a women's auxiliary group, what they did is every 20 minutes they had you change tables. So you couldn't move in one group to another table, but everybody at that group had to go to a separate table. So I think that one thing that we should be very cognizant of is making sure that the experiences, and that's really, we're creating a volunteer experience, not just a volunteer opportunity. We have to think about it as an experience, and that we want to create that experience in a way that is very inclusive, that makes people feel like I'm here, I belong here, and I met other people who didn't know other people, and just being thoughtful in that. It's almost like a constant icebreaker, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I think the good news is, and I think we have a presentation coming up here in February around this, but one of the research has shown, very recent, a PhD student that we work with, his dissertation showed that 15% increase in retention of volunteers when there's an experienced volunteer at the same event, right? So they looked at data from a big
Right.
food bank, and if you were volunteering with somebody that had been there before, you were 15% more likely as a new volunteer to come back. So I think having the buddy system or some sort of pairing or interaction really does actually uh, improve the experience of the new volunteers too.
I agree. And I think that something going back to that is you might want to have volunteer ambassadors. So when you have volunteers, and it's a legacy volunteer, you identify that somebody, you have a volunteer and they're really outgoing, they're really warm, they're an extrovert, that they want this role. Don't give this role to somebody who wouldn't want it, but you could say, hey, could you be our volunteer ambassador? We have on average 5 new people coming to this event. Here's who they are. Could you just make them feel welcome and tell them a story about why you volunteer? Make sure that they're not feeling like
Yeah.
they're on an island. So yeah, that's great.
So, well, I think that's it for the presentation today. Kapeen, thank you so much for joining us today. This was
Thanks
super
for
awesome. I know a lot of folks really liked it because we kept getting comments asking whether it's recorded or if we're going to send out a copy. And so we will for sure do that and send out this to everyone. But yeah, wanted to thank you again and wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. If you do want to learn about Civic Champs real briefly here after, we'll take 10 to 15 minutes to give you a quick highlight for folks. But otherwise, hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar.
Thank you. Thanks for joining. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
I'm going to stay on. I want to see
Oh,
this.
you want to say, oh, all right. In that case, let me share my screen and we'll try to keep this quick because I know everyone has a busy schedule. So let me replace share and I'm going to share with my phone screen first. So Civic Champs, like I said, we have lots of different ways to engage folks, starting from applications to collecting waivers to doing a scheduling of events to tracking hours. And so this is just our mobile app. Yeah. So this is
Yes.
one of the screenshots I think that Kapeen had shown earlier, but this is our home screen for volunteers. And so at the bottom, you'll see there's home, schedule, chats, and discover. And so a couple things real quick. So on the discover screen, you can easily sign up for events, right? And so let's say there's an event coming up I'm interested in. I can register for that real quickly, right? Select what I want to do for the day. And if I have like a waiver or something, I can agree to that right here. I can collect questionnaire answers right from folks as well, if that's something that you're interested in collecting from your volunteers. And then as an admin, you would get a notice that someone had signed up for your event. And then when they get there, right? So we try to make it super easy for folks. So it's just 2 taps to check in. So you hit the check-in button. It says, "Hey, are you here to volunteer today?" And what we're using is a geofence, right? So it's we're creating like a little geofence around your volunteer location, and you can check in real quickly here. At the end of the day, if someone decides that they're done for the day, they can check out. But if they forget, actually, we'll automatically check them out. And so hit the checkout button, and again, they can adjust if they wish and say what they did for the day. Maybe they were a delivery driver. And then again, and we showed this earlier, but you could leave reflections, right? So today was super fun, right? And we've been very surprised by how, how much this gets used in terms of, collecting little tiny, tiny testimonials, but also it gives a platform for people that maybe aren't confrontational, right? So to Kapeen's point on people who don't want to come up to you, especially maybe younger generations that aren't as comfortable with the face-to-face conversation, prefer to text you. And so in many ways, this allows them to share their voice as well in a way that's more comfortable, if you will. So finishing checkout, and that's it. So super, super easy. We also have some features here for admins where you can manage volunteers on the go. You can kind of multi-select and check them in. You can see upcoming events and who signed up for them. And so that's some of the features here on the mobile app. With that, let me take folks quickly over to the back end as well and show you what that might look like. So screens. All right, hopefully you all can see. Ariana, can you see my screen? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
I need a little audio input here myself. So a lot of folks use us also for scheduling and signing up volunteers. So like I said, we have application forms you can create, but also people and will embed us on their website. So this is one of our customers. It's a United Way. This is their Get Involved page. And you can see they have our calendar here loaded on their website. So you can kind of click here, see the information about what you want to do for the day. And then you can hit register. You can sign in here as a volunteer and then click and select, what you want to do for the day. Right? So maybe I want to greet and guide. I'm not going to sign up because this is a live event. So I won't do that to them. And then on the back end, we try to make everything as easy as possible and from a reporting standpoint. And so here you have, we looked at the activity log earlier already, but if I do a quick refresh, it should show our latest entry here, right? So I was a delivery driver, I volunteered for an hour, and I said today was super fun, right? You'll see we also have tags, so you can kind of tag people and helps you with your filtering and reporting. Everything is exportable, so you can always export things. And then if you want to see more of an overview, right? So each row now is a volunteer. And so you could say, hey, you know what? I want to see last year, what happened last year? And so last year we had 80 volunteers. They did 1,136 hours and with this kind of estimated impact. And we just pull that from the national average right there. And so let me make my screen a little bigger for folks to see. And then each person here is a row. And so you can have kind of a leaderboard. So Marcus is our top volunteer from an hour standpoint, Constance a second. If I click into Marcus, you can see it's my picture. Marcus is my older son's name, so that's why I use him. But you can see my contact info, my emergency contact, what groups they're part of, if they have waivers, and any notes that we might have left about this person. So that's kind of a very, very, very quick overview. We'll put sort of the link to do a more formal demo for anyone that's interested, or feel free to reach out to learn more. But just thought I'd give folks a quick glimpse into Civic Champs and what we can do for folks. But yeah, any questions from anyone? Let's see, we do have a chat, so now I gotta. All right, perfect. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I think that's it for today. Like I said, we'll try to give a few minutes back to everyone. And yeah, thank you all for joining and staying on to listen to our quick demo. Hopefully it was helpful, at least to allow folks to see the world of the possible.